Welcome to Hindu at Heart. I am your host, Indu Viswanathan. Every episode, I will be speaking with an inspiring American born Hindu as they share their journeys, triumphs, and the meaningful struggles that shape their lives. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by my dear friend, Dr. Anisha Pareddy. Dr. Pareddy is a first generation physician, future cardiologist, and dedicated sadhaka, a true woman of the heart. She finds joy in learning about the people and cultures of the world, exploring fashion as a form of expression, and spending cozy moments snuggling her dog, Clove, who is named after the spice her late grandfather lovingly carried in his pocket. Welcome.
Thank you.
So glad to have you here. Nisha, I want to begin a little bit with just your story, like your origin story. Who were you as a Hindu child growing up in Carmel, Indiana? What are your earliest memories?
I think my earliest memories are two strong memories. So my family is we're a Venkateshwar Swami Balaji devotees. So my earliest devotees are waking up every Saturday morning to the Suprabhatam, which I feel is a very almost an American Indian a Hindu experience, and going to the Pittsburgh temple, the Balaji temple in Pittsburgh. Uh, those two places have always been, or that temple and the Aurora temple in Chicago. So those three experiences, I think, really shaped me as a child because I just loved going to the temple. And we didn't have a temple in Carmel, Indiana when I was growing up. So those were like special things that we got to do. And the Suprabhatam waking up was like my mom with her turban on her head after she had showered, and she was doing her puja, and we were all listening to it. And honestly, I think I hope to be a mother like that someday too.
Yeah, yeah. It's such a specific, like almost aesthetic
Yes.
memory that so many of us had. Before we actually dive into your childhood a little bit, tell me about how your parents arrived to the United States. What's a little bit of their story?
Yeah, so my dad did his PhD in Canada. He came in 1982, and then he moved to the United States for his postdoc. And right before he moved to the US, he went to India. He had an arranged marriage with my mother, and they got married. They were spent a few weeks together, and then about 6 months later, she came to the US.
And
And then, oh, go ahead.
what part of India?
So my parents are both Telugu. So at the time where they were growing up, it was Andhra Pradesh, and now where they are from is Telangana.
And what brought your father to Canada?
So it's interesting. I have almost extreme pride to be a physician in the United States because that was what my dad wanted to do in India. Um, but when you come from a poor family in India, at times your education is what takes you. And so my dad's education, he tried to take the exam to get into a government school in India, but for a medical school, and he didn't get in. And then he said, "Okay, let me move on." And he continued his education in plant genetics. So he came to do his PhD in plant genetics in Canada and did quite well for himself. I'm very fortunate to have a father who was very educated, cared a lot about education, and supported my dream, and also in a way I got to fulfill his, which I feel very grateful for.
Yeah, it's very sweet, full circle.
Yes.
Um, what did it mean to be Hindu and grow up Hindu in a place like Carmel?
um, Carmel was a very affluent, conservative, white place when I was growing up. I didn't have a lot of people that were my age that were also Indian and Hindu, um, whether that was at school or just in the community. Everybody was a bit older or a bit younger. Um, what it meant was people not really understanding. Um, and that could be very cruel at times. The kinds of questions that were I was asked, or I mean, I have memories of kids telling me that I was gonna go to hell because I didn't believe in Jesus, and I think it was lonely.
Mm.
It was lonely in that specific way, but I was really lucky that I had really loving parents, so I could come home and share the experiences with them, but I think still I wish that it would be it could have been different, that I could have had friends to kind of share in that with, to go to the temple with, or do things with that felt uniquely Hindu. And I mean, now it's so the city is very different. 10% of this suburb, because everyone moved in because it's a really great school system. So it's South and East Asian, right? So there's a lot of Hindus that live in Carmel, and there is a temple in Indianapolis that that my parents helped fundraise for and build with other members of the community. So it's just very different. It's known now, and people they had a Diwali celebration. They have holy celebrations in the city of Carmel, which I could have never fathomed growing up.
Mm. Hmm. And what was it like with your like did anything ever happen like with your teachers at school where kids were saying things or maybe your teachers said things and did you feel like you could kind of counter what was being said or speak up for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think the strongest recollection. I was very fortunate to have really awesome teachers, I will say. And I mean, of course, speaking to one of my favorite teachers, of course, which is you, even though you weren't my teacher. But I had really lovely teachers. The thing that I have a recollection of, though, was of course, everyone I remember like in my freshman world history class, we talked about that was when we started talking about India and Indian history. And, the first concept that they bring up or the most prominent is the caste system. And I just remember being like, is this really the most, I remember as a 14-year-old being like, is this really why are we learning about this? Is this really the most important thing that everybody should know about? Um, I think that was the strongest, thing that I experienced in, grade school, I would say.
Yeah. Was that something you discussed with your family?
No, I don't think so. I didn't. I mean, I think I remember being it's almost like I was more excited that they talked about us because, it felt like it was the first time I was known, or that it was worth talking about in school.
Mm.
And I was lucky in some ways where, there is a little feature about me in the newspaper where they took my photo during Diwali and I was wearing like a little lenga and I was lucky that like we would have different expressions because I mean, that was one part, right? Where I was able to have my mom came to school and like talked about what it was to be Indian, but not specifically Hindu. And I think that's the first recollection I have of like really discussing Hinduism in
Mm.
school.
Mm. And did your classmates ask you questions? Was that their first encounter?
I don't know if they cared so much.
Yeah.
I think they learned and they were like, they learned what they needed to learn to do well on exams. And I think
Mm.
uh, after that, there wasn't a lot of curiosity, but there wasn't. I will say, once I got to high school, there wasn't a lot. There was more Indians because everyone came to the same high school, right? So there
Uh-huh.
was a few of us. But I think that at least they weren't cruel anymore. You know what I mean? They weren't curious, but they weren't cruel.
Okay. So just sort of agnostic about it.
Mhm.
Yeah. Um, at what point do you feel like, because you talk about this sort of very heart space of connecting with visits to the temple, etc. At what point did Hinduism shift from something you kind of inherited from your family to something that was really yours?
So I was really lucky. My mom's brother, my mama, he loved reading and he loved books. So every time I went to India, he would buy me every book that I ever wanted. He would take me to Walden Books, if, of course,
Mhm.
and and I would bring back like 15 books. And what it would be versions of the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, Amar Chitra Katha, all of these different stories. I have read the Krishna Lila. I read, you know, every possible book that could come in that form from India. And I think that's when it became, and I was lucky that I had that growing up. So it was my experience with it, and I would talk to my family about it. And the way that we would have the experience was also watching the Ramayana and Mahabharata, the DVDs, the half an hour episodes. We watched both of them, the entire things together. Every Friday we would sit and watch, one, two, three. Sometimes we'd be like, can we watch another episode? And as I got older, I would be like, let's pause. And I would be like, oh, this is the backstory of Shakuni. This is the backstory of this person. So we had this experience where it didn't feel intellectual, it felt loving, and it felt informative, and it felt there was obviously that connection was there with our Hinduism and learning the stories that my parents grew up with, but also understanding and feeling, why Yudhishthira why he came from a space of dharma, or we would talk about those things. We wouldn't, or like, why was Ravana still a devotee of Shiva, but also could be quote, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
There's all these little elements that we would experience that I think I started experiencing as a young adult. And I asked a lot of questions. And I think at the time, my parents didn't have the answers.
Uh-huh.
And that was harder for me, I think.
Mhm. Mm. And then you chose to be a religious studies major in
Yeah.
university. What led you to that? Because that's not a typical choice, right?
Yeah. So I took a course. I actually took, it was just Religions of the East. That was what it was called at Indiana University. And I was very lucky. That professor I didn't love so much. Full disclosure. I found that he had a very one-sided experience of and one-sided expression of what Hinduism was, which was like a very, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, but like a very North Indian expression that I just didn't understand. I was like, this isn't my experience of my Hinduism, and it isn't my experience of my practices, and just going to the temple or puja or just my relationship. But I did take, I think there was another professor that taught a part of the class, that taught about Taoism and Confucianism and Zen Buddhism,
Mhm.
and then I just became more interested in learning about it from a even an intellectual capacity. And then I didn't really take many religion courses about Hinduism, and I
Mhm.
got the opportunity to actually learn about Western religions, from an intellectual academic space. And I had some of the best professors I could ever, and they just this understanding, like they always admired my frame of reference because it was not a Western frame of reference, and
Mm.
I was so curious, and I think that's what really cultivated me to actually bring it on as a major because I took a couple classes and I was like, this is amazing. And we had fun, right? Like we had fun talking about it and understanding it and intellectualizing it, but also like there was other people of other religions, right? There was many Christian people or Jewish people in those classes. And we would have these discussions where we could understand the central theme of love in many religions and also I could conceptualize how other religions were different from mine.
Mm. So let's break down some ideas that might be out there about professors of religion, like whether they're ethnically Indian slash Hindu versus not. What was your experience with that and how open people were to your perspectives?
Yeah, so interestingly, I don't know if I had a single ethnically Indian professor.
Mm.
Um, I had actually, I would say, entirely all white professors. Um, but I will say that the professors that I had, I mean, I have to give them credit. They listened to me. They loved hearing what I had to say. They loved the questions that I had, and they were the same people that, even at graduation, like, said like, they did a reception of the graduates, and they, like, said the kindest things to me and my family. They were like, "She is such a joy." Because the thing that I have been driven on always, and it's what led me to being a physician, but also what leads me to just loving people is curiosity.
Mhm.
Uh, and I think that it was the first place that I think in an academic setting was like truly, truly supported was in my religious studies education. And, some of those professors don't even work at IU anymore. They've moved to different places, likely more liberal schools. Not that IU isn't liberal. It can be quite liberal. I know things are changing in the world, but and
Mhm.
open. But I was very fortunate to have people that really heard me
Yeah.
in college.
That's so refreshing and wonderful to hear. And maybe later we can get a list of those professors' names. Because and unfortunately, that actually sounds quite unusual, especially now in 2026, to hear that. Did you encounter ideas maybe that you were like, hold on a second? And those professors might have been open to it, but they were ideas where you were like, actually, this has nothing to do with what I know about Hinduism.
Hmm. Honestly, I think because of my experience with my freshman professor, I didn't take very many classes about Hinduism. I didn't. I
Mm.
had. I did take one. I took an introductory to Hinduism class, and I found that she was like, it's interesting because you almost, with some of my professors, like, even if they weren't ethnically Indian, I would be like, "Wait, but like, do you like, are you, I would be wondering, I'd be like, wait, but are you Hindu? Because of how much like love and reverence they did have, even if it wasn't necessarily the same scope of the way I learned about Hinduism and the way I experienced Hinduism, there was something that was like very reverent about the way
Mm.
Hinduism and Buddhism. Actually, my Buddhism course, um, one of the things that everybody would do, it was a whole semester long, and this professor would we would almost everybody would guess. He was like, guess if I am Buddhist or not, because you would never know based on how much love he spoke about the religion and how much he really understood, like, he got he got it, and, like, you would be like, every time you'd be like, "Wait, but is he?" And you would have no idea, but it was like I was very lucky. I know and now as I reflect back, I haven't really thought about it, um, because they really fostered my curiosity. The places that actually would be much more where they would be like, "Oh, your perspective is," I would in my, like, classes about Christianity or Judaism where I was learning about all of this for the first time, right? I had no experience of it. I had no learning, and I would be like, I would raise my hand, and everybody would be talking, and then I would be like, what is that? And they would be like, oh, we need to step back. Like, what's a Eucharist? I was like, what's a Eucharist? I don't know what that is. I was like, I don't understand. What are we doing? What are you talking about? And then they would, backtrack and be like, oh, this is this. And then I'd be like, oh, now I have an opinion about it. And then they would respect and listen to my opinion. I'd be like, oh, based on what my understanding is it this? And I think it brought questions that they wouldn't, people take a lot of things for granted in Western religions that, you know, I was just like, huh? Like, what do you mean? And then they would be like, oh, wait, you're right. That's such an interesting question that you had. And I was very lucky to have people that fostered that.
Right, right. And it sounds like you even took up those questions still with a lot of respect and reverence,
Oh,
right? So what do you mean is not um like a hidden or coded message of this doesn't make sense. It's a
absolutely.
genuine question, which I think is really important in academic spaces. Now, at the same time, while you were at IU, you found a guru.
Yes.
So how did that happen? Tell us the story of how that happened. I love this story. I know this.
The story of how it happened. So I took a Hindi class. So I'm Telugu, so I'm fluent in Telugu. I don't write it, but I speak it fluently at home, and I was very lucky that was I am fluent. But I obviously grew up watching Bollywood movies, and I was like, let me take a language that I would never get an opportunity to take elsewhere. I did take French up until my sophomore year too, but I was like, yeah, let me try something different.
Mhm.
So I took Hindi. And in my Hindi class, there was a tall white man that I befriended, and he, I was like curious about him, obviously. And one day he was like, "Hey, do you want to come to this yoga session with me?" I was like, "Sure, I'll come." You know. And when I got there, he led me through asana, and then we sat for a guided meditation, and I just like felt really lovely at the end. And then our friend, who is now one of my very close friends, was like, "Hey, there is a workshop that you could do that's called the Art of Living, or the Yes Plus workshop, which is what it was called at the time, where you can learn breathing and meditation techniques. Are you interested?" I was like, "Sure." And the thing is I was always inclined. It didn't feel, it felt like, sure, that's a extension of all the other things. I had exposure to meditation from, my uncle and from some of my dad's friends. So it was not the first experience I had had, but it was the first structured experience. And so I took this workshop, and I was like, wow, this is lovely. Like, I feel connected. I feel wonderful. Um, and then I was like, okay, it wasn't like I was like immediately, all right, this is the thing. But as life would have it, I wanted to spend more time with this guy.
Uh-huh. Mhm.
um, and as I did, I also picked up a book that was a book sharing the experience of somebody with a guru. And my guru, in fact. And I was just like, oh, like this is it. Like, this was the experience that I was just like, "Oh, I've been yearning for this, and I didn't even know."
Mm.
Guidance. And then I heard Guru Puja chanted for the first time, and I was like, "I must chant that. I must know it." It was like it was like something shifted in me, um, that I can never explain, and I was like, "I must chant that, I must know that, and I must find," it was like, I have to,
Mhm.
find the person, that this is, about, and the lineage, right?
Mhm.
And then, then it was like kind of like, okay, when? It was like I was already feeling the devotion. I was already kind of having the experience. And then I was able pretty soon after, about a year after, then I was able to meet Gurudev, or Sri Sri Ravi Shankar, in Canada. And, before I even while I was waiting, or when I first saw him, it was just tears. It was like tears of gratitude, and I knew.
Mhm.
This was in 2010, so it's been, this year will be 16 years, and it changed everything, right? Because what Gurudev gave me, and what he gives everyone really, is answers, is understanding, is explanations, along with devotion and love and care. And I think I had been trying to find that last piece for myself, and that was what Gurudev gave me. And
Mhm.
for me, it was like deep connection with the people around me, and it was practices that made me feel quiet. um, and by then in college, I think I was struggling, and interestingly, I enjoyed my religious studies courses, but I was struggling on the science side,
Mm.
which is, I mean, now I'm a physician, and it's crazy to think that that's what my experience was, and whether it even had any significance, or not. But um, he gave me, or the course and the practices gave me, a lot of space to just relax, and,
Mhm.
like, I ended up doing so much better in the second half after,
Mhm.
than, um, than before.
Hmm.
So,
And was a guru something that had been, like, on your radar earlier? Like, you had talked about how you asked your parents some questions and they didn't necessarily have answers, where you were like, "Oh, well, a guru could help." Like, was that on your radar at all?
not at all. Not at all, and it wasn't on my parents' radar either, for me to find one.
Yeah.
I think that their relationship with Hinduism, their guru is, I mean, Shirdi Sai Baba, who has passed. And so there are, but they also believe Shirdi Sai Baba is a god. So there is devotion and love and reverence, but there's not a person that's there to answer questions live,
Mhm.
right? In a human form that's alive still.
Yeah.
Um, so they had some conception of it, but I don't think that they thought I would find one independently, and nor did they, I don't know if they necessarily realized that was available to them or to me.
Mm.
I don't think any of us thought of it until it happened, which is
Mhm.
what's very interesting.
And how did they respond?
So in the beginning, I think they were cautious. I mean, I was 19. I was in college, and I was, like, super involved and wanted to be super involved, but they were very supportive, and somehow just they supported me through all of it. And I did a lot of courses in the beginning, and I was able to see Gurudev, and um meditate and learn different things, and, very quickly. I mean, within the span of 3 years, I they sent me to many places, and they trusted my friends, and it's funny, right? Because I don't know if I would have expected it. When I look back, I'm like, "Man, how'd they do that?" Because they had no idea, but they did it, and of course, now, 16 years later,
Yeah.
there's a lot of, of course, we just all think back, we're like, "How did that happen?" But it was supposed to happen, and that's how it was supposed to happen, so it did, and,
Yeah.
um, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm gonna go back to a little thing that a drop that you hinted earlier in terms of finding your guru was a boy. You met your guru
Uh-huh.
because you were chasing a boy. Let's see. Let's just state that. Let's talk a little bit about this idea of like relationship and marriage. So now you're, a young adult and you found a guru and you've sort of located that you feel a lot of joy and get a lot of comfort and clarity in that space of spirituality, religion, of personal practice, sadhana, all of this. How did that figure into how you thought about dating and eventually marriage?
So I think one thing that became clear, it's interesting, it's shifted over time. I think in the beginning, I really cared about having somebody be as involved as I was, and to have the same guru and have that experience. Um, and I think that what it led to was sometimes like, I mean, ultimately, what it led to is like sometimes people being interested almost for me rather than for the actual, practices. And then when push came to shove, it was kind of thrown in my face, um, and wasn't an authentic experience. But I think as I've gotten older, what I understand is what I appreciate is reverence and respect, right? Because I want someone to be interested in the things that make me me and that drive me, right? My guru and my practices and my sadhana and my seva drive me. That's why, I mean, I know we'll talk about this a little bit later, but that's why I am the way I am. So if someone can honor and respect that, it's also honoring and respecting me. So that's where I think, landed with that. So it's just like having curiosity of doing the course and learning the techniques, whether they practice or not. That is their choice, of course. But there should be some baseline respect and reverence for my guru, and also a baseline respect and reverence for me and the practices that I partake in.
Mm. What about for Hinduism and like Hindu principles and philosophies and all of that?
Yeah, so, I mean, for me, oh, go ahead. They
Yeah.
are interchangeable,
Okay.
for me. My practices and my Hinduism all go together. I'm not somebody who's, when you say, "Oh, I'm more spiritual than religious," what does that mean? That doesn't mean anything to me in Hinduism,
Mhm.
because our spirituality is, in essence, our religion, and that's what it's based on and rooted in. And, there are people who do practices. But they're from our religion, right? They're from our Vedas, they're from our rishis and our gurus and our lineages. So it doesn't quite that doesn't quite, you know what I mean? It's all one thing.
Mhm.
So when I bring somebody into that experience as well, it's somebody who is Hindu, or well, and now it is somebody who is Hindu. So I have someone who is Hindu who has reverence and respect for the pujas and the
Mhm.
um practices and rituals along that go along with my spirituality, along with my meditation, along with my even yoga practice, my asana, everything kind of, it all fits together, because there's no separation of the two,
Mm.
for me, honestly. And I think if with my partner, they have to respect all of that, right? Or be a part of it. And I think now I have the fortune of someone who is a part of it and plans to be more part of it.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that because for me, that what that leads to is how I raise children, and I do want children. So raising children in a home that is surrounded with the same values that I was raised in, but even with more information and more understanding, is what I aspire to be. And I think that that's fostered with a deep relationship that you can both create that together.
Yeah. I think, I mean, what you're bringing into this conversation and how you're thinking about it is probably a lot more sophisticated. And spiritually, like you have a lot more self awareness
Mm.
than you did over 10 years ago when I first met you, right?
For sure.
And a lot of what you're saying I can hear is informed, and you have the benefit now of having had a very different type of relationship earlier.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit and what that taught you?
Yeah. So I was previously married, and it was a relationship that was the best way I say it is that someone was very not very kind to me. Um but the relationship I have with that experience is actually multifold because during it, I believe that it was, everybody says this phrase like in America, like, oh, everything happens for a reason, right? But that's not how I conceptualize it. I conceptualize it as these are things that were my karma that I was to endure and to get through. And the way that I got through them and also endured them was with the guru and with a practice. What I think is that if I didn't have something to ground me through that whole process, I would have been fully broken.
Mm,
Um, I was lucky to have people who loved me that came through the art of living and my guru, along with a, a guru who loved me,
mm,
right? And parents, of course, who very much loved me and supported me always. But all of those things didn't take away the fact that I had to endure some hardship.
mm,
Um, and endure hardship with someone who I thought shared the same religion and respect and reverence that I did. But when, again, like I had mentioned, I had referred to earlier, right? Like when push came to shove, no, that reverence and respect was not there. There was not that mutual sense of respect, and it didn't matter.
mhm,
And once it flipped, I was like, okay, well, I'm not. You can't convince anybody of anything that they don't want to do, and nor do I want to.
mm,
And I was able to get through it. I don't think I would have been able to get through it not knowing, like, okay, I had to go through this in this lifetime, and
mhm,
my guru softened it for me.
mm,
Um, with all the sadhana that I've done, with all of the, um, pranayama, with everything, with all the meditations, with all the love I've poured into the world, this was softened for me, but I still experienced it because it was my karma,
mm,
and I was able to get through with honestly, with full faith and full devotion because, life isn't not about experiencing hard things, right? It's how we get through the hard things.
mm,
People think that the best lives are lives that we've not experienced difficult things, but it's, our guru says, how do you keep a smile on your face through the difficult challenges, right? And, did I always have a smile? No. Did I have as many a sad operas
mm,
as we discuss?
yeah,
But those things are there. It's all a part of life. And I
mm,
was able to come through it's been years now, and I have maintained my faith and my love, and it has driven me to being the person and physician that I am.
yeah. Um, just because there might be folks out there who are currently navigating something similar, how did your family respond to you telling them? Not just your parents, but your extended family, and did it surprise you?
Yeah. Um, I would say my parents, especially my dad, my mom was too, but my dad was like, whatever makes you happy. We love you. We support you. You have clearly thought things through. My, um, I think I remember my great grandma, who is 90 now. When we told her finally, because it was after some time, she was like, these things are happening. She said it in Telugu, of course. She's like, these things are happening all the time. She's like, all we want is for you to, she's like, it's okay. These things are happening. And like nobody really made a big deal of it. And I think, of course, that is within the context of my family and their own experiences and the things that are happening that I won't air out everyone's, business.
Mhm.
But I think that there was a lot more love and than I expected, and I think they weren't as disappointed as I expected. And I think I carried a lot of like fear around disappointing everyone, especially as the oldest daughter. Um, and like the oldest granddaughter as well on my mother's side. So, but everybody, I think I'm sure there are, distant relatives or family friends that are just not, very close that said not so nice things. But in the end of the day, the people that mattered all supported me. And I also had the bubble that was COVID, which was where I just didn't have to see anybody while I was going through it. And I was able to reconcile and journey through it on my own with the help of just the people near me and the people that I actually wanted to spend time with and talk to.
Yeah.
Um, so I was very, it's for the people that are going through this, I always try to normalize it, and not normalize it in the way that it's okay, but normalize it in the way that it's okay as in what I went through was okay, but that it's okay to go through these things and make these choices, and that love will find you, and that these things um are accepted within our culture and our society. Even if it feels tough, it's your life. So that's the thing that I will always remind even my friend, because other people that I know haven't had such easy, and easy is relative, right? But easier experiences where everyone was supportive. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. I know that's not an easy topic, but again, these ideas of grace and sangha and love are just sort of the through lines, right? So let's now turn those through lines towards your career. For as long as I've known you, you've wanted to be a physician. Um, and that's been a journey, but in that process, you also discovered your specialization. So tell us a little bit about that. There are a lot of people in the Hindu community who are physicians, but we don't often make the connection between our Hindu orientation and becoming a physician. So
Yeah.
take it away.
So honestly, being a Hindu and being a physician makes the most sense to me. These two things, what I see every day, and the journey of getting there was, of course, it was like, I want to serve, I want to serve, I want to serve. And that was the feeling that I kept having. And I know that, everyone's like, I want to be a doctor because I want to help people. And it's like a joke in the medical community where like people answer that way. And of course, people want to help people. That's not it. But for me, it was, I want to serve.
Hmm.
And it felt like the way that I was going to serve. Every time I did other things that were a stepping stone to becoming a physician, all I kept feeling was, okay, but I want to do more. I want to be able to do more. I want to be able to do more. And when I say do, of course, that's relative with the doership, because of course things are flowing through me, right? But that was the feeling. It was like there was something else I should be doing. That's what the feeling I kept having. And then ultimately, and I ended up getting into medical school 6 years after I graduated from undergrad, and in the interim worked as a case manager at a homeless clinic. And all of the things that I did do, though, were of service, along with being able to, you know, continue my career or push it forward. Um, and, medical school I thought would be an incredibly difficult thing. And I was pleasantly surprised to have great friends throughout that supported me, but also the curiosity of being like, oh, I wasn't the best student, but I was not the worst student at all. And I like that. I was like, oh, I can do well. I can enjoy this material. It's not just, I used to think, oh, I'm not good at this part. I'm only good at the people part of spending time with people and listening to their stories. But I was like, no, I'm good at that part too. Um, and now, as a practicing, well, I'm 3 months away from being an attending internal medicine physician and starting my cardiology fellowship. So for me, as I practice in residency, being a Hindu and seeing life and death around me every single second, it's the only thing that makes anything make sense, right? It's the only thing where I'm like, I will do the best I can to take care of people, but sometimes the people that don't necessarily take care of themselves or whatever, their judgments that we cast as society, they live. They will get resuscitated and they'll live and they'll live and they'll live. And then people who you'll find out like are 42 years old and have metastatic cancer and they die in 2 months. And you're like, how does any of this make any sense? How can you reconcile any of it? And the only way I have a framework of it is through my Hinduism and through my experience of dharma and karma, and knowing that things just happen the way they happen, right? This is what it was for people in their lifetime, and everything that I'm doing is flowing through the divine. Um, any diagnosis I catch or anything that I end up doing, it's not me. It is me, but it's not me, right? It's because this person we were supposed to find this out through me, right? Or I was supposed to do this through me. And it allows me to take a step back and I think drop my ego for sure. Of course, I'm a human being. I have my ego at moments where I'm like, dang, look at me. I found that out. Right. But then when I really take a step back and I'm like, oh, like this is just happening through me. Like I get to be loving and giving and give all of the energy that I have accumulated and continue to accumulate with my sadhana to people and love them. And I see what that looks like.
Mm.
And, one of the things that I want to do as a cardiologist is work with very sick patients who have advanced heart failure. And some of what you do in that is palliative medicine. And you are talking to people and telling them that there is not necessarily options left, but guiding them through that process of having dignity in life and dignity in death. Um, I think being a Hindu has been the like utter source of it all because it's the only way, in my personal opinion, that I have been able to get through it, right? Because some days are very difficult, some days are very painful, some days, but knowing that this is not in my hands and this is about people living and dying and it's about also reincarnation and this is about this form and this form was supposed to live for this long and that was it, our guru talks about and not to minimize reincarnation, but he talks a bit or, but the way he says it is it's like changing bodies is like changing clothes. And when we get so attached to the body and so attached to staying alive, then we can't see that, oh, our soul is bigger than that. Everything is bigger than that. And I can see, right? I encourage people to let go so that they can continue to move on in their journey, whether that's to attain moksha or to take another form. And it has been the privilege of my life to be able to be a Hindu um, woman practicing medicine.
Mm. It's really profound, and I don't think we get to hear this a lot from the thousands of Hindu physicians we have in this country and other healthcare people in healthcare. Um, how does it kind of situate you with your colleagues who aren't Hindu?
Yeah. Um, I think what I try to encourage of my colleagues, you know, I definitely hold myself to a very high standard despite all of this as well. And I hold them to that standard as well. But I think what it allows me to do for my colleagues is provide a space of compassion and empathy and to remind them that they did the best that they could and that things happen the way they happen, right? I think otherwise there is a lot of physicians, and I know that especially many physicians who worked through COVID, who have a lot of trauma around what they felt like they could have done differently or more or better. And, that is um, something that we all live with every second of every day, whether people realize it or not.
Mm.
And for me, what that looks like is creating a space for my non-Hindu friends that it is okay and that they did their best and, reminding them that people are allowed to die. Um, I think that's the biggest thing because I will say that I find that Hindus tend to be less afraid of death because of our conception of reincarnation and because of our deep belief in it. Um, and I think that being able to talk about death and being able to accept it, I try to provide a space, with my patients and with my colleagues.
Mm. Yeah, it's not often something we we hear, right? And I really appreciate what you say about us being just less afraid
Yeah.
of death, of the cycle of life and death. Um, what guided you towards your specialization in cardiology?
It's almost like the world was always taking me there. It was my first experience of medicine when I was 16 in high school. And then, I continued and did research in a cardiovascular pathophysiology lab, when I did my master's after undergrad. Um, but I think for me, the idea of the heart is so unique. And I think that for me, the fascination around that, of it being the center and the core of everything, is like what drove me there. And then it's just like, I was like, this just brings me so much joy learning about something that is the essence of the body. And it's kind of interesting as a spiritual person to say that because, of course, I know the essence of the body is beyond the physical realm, um, but it feels like the closest in the actual physical body. Um, and it's just a fascinating organ, and also, it's funny because it's the hardest for me. It's still very hard for me to conceptualize cardiology, and many concepts within cardiology, but it makes sense also, and I think that's kind of how I brought myself here. But it feels very joyful to be someone who is just a for those who know me and those who don't, I'm very loving, I'm very heart driven in my experience of life and how I operate in all of my relationships, and for me to be that in my professional life too just makes the most sense. It just kind of fits.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I can attest to that as absolutely. Um, you shared a story once, and I don't know if you wanna talk about this, of, a Hindu patient that you had, and how much came up for you sort of guiding him and his family. Wanna talk
Yeah. Um, so I had a very young Hindu patient who was in his late 30s. Um, and it was just interesting because he became sick very quickly. He had been somebody who never ate even out. He didn't even eat out. He ate at home. He was vegetarian. He didn't drink. He didn't do anything, and just lived a very truly pious life. He was someone who he did his sadhana, he did pujas every day. He was someone who was very, very honestly pious is the word I can come up with, and devoted. And he just had a bellyache and a couple that lasted for a couple weeks. And when they found out that he actually had metastatic cancer, I mean, it was, I think, a shock to them and the family, and by the time that I played a role, he was at the end of his life, um, and it was interesting because all of the people that played a role in his end of life care happened to be other Hindus, which, um, isn't necessarily common in the hospital that I work at, um, and or Indians, and I think it was just interesting because it's like he knew it's like the universe knew that the people to take care of him in those moments and for him to reconcile with his death and life was someone who also shared his faith. Um, and it was interesting as, like, in discussion with him, he was a Adi Shankaracharya devotee, and, our lineage is from Adi Shankaracharya's lineage, so it was like it was supposed to happen that way, that we were able to discuss concepts and ideas to reconcile his death, which, in a regular sense would be out of the scope of my job, right? I was for me at the time, I was keeping him comfortable, but the scope of your job doesn't quite matter in these moments. But I got to, spend time with his mother-in-law, his wife, and his children, and him, and it was a very profound experience, because I could share in the religious aspect of their reconciliation around his death, and I could have those conversations with them, and I think ultimately gave them the peace that they deserved, once he did ultimately pass, and, um, it gave me the peace also, because I knew that I played a role that was meant to a role I was meant to play for this person, in these moments, that really it changed everything, for me. It it was a reminder, right? Because I think you don't often this is it's not a normal experience to have such a deep relationship with the patient and their family. Of course, I develop very loving relationships with many of my patients, but when it hits so close to home, it feels like you were experiencing it with them.
Right.
And I was able to kind of even with that have difficult conversations with my own family about, things that they would wish to happen. And it opened a lot of doors of understanding death in a way that I think maybe even before that I hadn't. Um, yeah,
Mm. Thank you for sharing that. It's not something we talk about often.
yeah,
It's really not. I think we touch on what I'm appreciating about everything that you're saying is what you said at the beginning of this part of the conversation. When we talk about physicians, it's all about helping people, but we don't talk about this stage of helping people that often.
yeah.
And what you're sharing is incredibly profound, and I think is going to touch a lot of people deeply in their hearts. Which leads me to my last question. I could talk to you for 3 hours, but
How much we normally talk.
um, what does it mean to you now in this moment? You have arrived at you're at the cusp of your really getting into your specialization, like really dedicating some years into that. You've also found a partner, a life partner, right? So this is really we're at the precipice of a new chapter of your life that on so many levels. What is it? And then also we're in a particular moment in the country, in the world. What does it mean to you right now to be Hindu at heart?
I think at this moment, for me to be Hindu at heart is to I think that the thing that pops up in my brain is like to do as much seva as I can. Um, and seva, of course, most people that are probably watching this know what that means, but it's selfless service from the core of your being. And how I've been able to navigate this chapter of our society and world and humanity around us is that I get to love people every day. I get to take care of them. And that comes from me being Hindu at heart. I know that many people who are not Hindu do love their patients, of course, equitably or if not more. But for me, my Hinduism, my faith, my devotion, I get to take that and put that into human beings every single day. Light, like every person is a light in front of me, and I get to devote my love and light to their light. And that's what it feels like to be Hindu at heart in this moment. Um, and as I get to become a cardiologist and hopefully, a wife and a mother, all of those things, I think that being Hindu at heart guides my light towards everyone else's. And I think also the ability to find light in the darkest moments um, is something that feels profoundly Hindu to me because every human being, every being has light within them. And that is just something that, the soul of is something that we believe and that, they will take many forms and they will continue to whether they return or they be, attain. moksha, there is still light and consciousness there, that we're all part of one. So getting to be close to other beings and consciousness and devote my life to them feels like how I get to be Hindu at heart from now and to eternity. You're muted, babe.
I said that's really sweet, and then I said I lied. I have one more question. What Either what would you tell your 20-year-old self, or what advice would you give to 20-year-old, I would say specifically Hindu American women, young women?
What I would tell my 20-year-old self and specific so I have because I think when I was 20, I was very open to being Hindu, and I was very much within my Hindu experience and religion. So I would tell myself to keep on keeping on, and that it will get better, and that things will make sense. That's
Mm.
what I would tell myself. And then, but to Hindu American women of all ages, but especially young women, I would say, like, be curious. There's a lot of dialogue, where people are making generalizations about our religion and about things that are untrue, and to be curious and find the real source of the love and light that is our religion. I know that sounds a little cheesy, love and light, but it truly is just so full of devotion and love, and everything that we do, every offering that we give is full of love, and remembering that, like, to be curious about that and to just dive in as much as you can and really accept and appreciate it, because nothing else will give you that. Um, Nothing else will. And we'll try to find other places to find it, but it is the thing that makes life rich and beautiful and lovely, and it will always support you in every endeavor that you have. So,
Oh, so sweet. And you are so sweet, and I adore you. Thank you so much for this. This is such a gift. Um, if people want to reach out to you, how can they contact you to talk to you? And
yeah, you can, give them my email. My email is, reddy.pareddy@gmail.com, reddy.pareddy@gmail.com. Anybody can shoot me an email. Sometimes I can be a little bit delayed in my responses, obviously due to my clinical duties, but I will always respond. So please, I'm happy to I love mentoring people. I love supporting them, whether that's within medicine or within just being a Hindu American woman,
yeah,
girl, I'm happy to. So
yeah. Also, great makeup tips. All right. Thank you so much.
thank you. I love you.
Love you.